Gimel? Sif
So
Gimel?
we're holding on the second paragraph of Sif Gimel, but we'll give a short review of what we learned until now, since there's only one person from last week over here. So last week we started the Maimer Balaila Hahu. It's a Purim Maimer, and we have a Mitzvah Hashem another 3 shirim to finish the Maimer for Purim. So Fidik, this is actually the first Maimer. I checked in the Sefer Marim Tavshin. It's actually the first Maimer that the Fidik Rebbe had printed. Either he said it here or it was just printed. I'm not sure, but it's the first American Maimer that's printed in Sefer Marim. So you can imagine that, just like a builder first lays the foundations of a building, before he builds the next levels. The idea of this Maimer probably is very fundamental to our Aveda over here in America. Be that as it may, so Fidik Rebbe says, it says in Megillah, Balaila Hahu Noded Shnas HaMelech. Yeah, the story in the Megillah everybody knows, that Achashverosh couldn't fall asleep, and they read the Sefer HaZichrenis, the book of memories, for the king, and he was told over there how Mordechai saved his life, and Punkt Haman came at the same time, and he told the king he wanted to tell the king to kill Mordechai. And the end of the story is that the king told him that he has to take Mordechai around on a horse, and announced before him, Kachi Yasalisha Sharamel Chavetz Bikare, and this was the beginning of the downfall of Haman. As anybody who has listened to the Purim story audio tapes for children knows what Zeresh told him when he came home, that by the Yidden, once if you're winning them, then you keep going all the way up, and once you start falling, you go all the way down. So this was the beginning of the Mapala, and it says in Minhagei Maril, which is a halacha sefer, that when the Balkari reads Balaila Hahu, when he reaches the part of Balaila Hahu, he has to start reading with a louder voice. Why? Because that's when the primary nes occurred. The primary nes was Balaila Hahu Noded Shnas HaMelech, and the Fidik Rebbe asks in his Maimer L'Chura, the main nes is when Esther was pleading for her life, or if you want to look at it in a more of a pneumistic way, you could say when the Yidden were davening to the Eibishter. That's the main part of the nes. Whichever way you look at it, Balaila Hahu at that night, how's that the primary part of the nes? So he explains that it says Balaila Hahu Noded Shnas HaMelech, that it was a time of night, and even though it was a time of night, the king couldn't sleep. And he explains what does this mean in Pnimiyus HaInyan? That Laila is the time of Golus, and in the time of Golus, so it's compared to sleep. And he explains it based on the idea that Adam is Al Shem Adam Elyon, a person, whatever is going on by him, that's reflecting on what's going on Lamaila. So why is the time of Golus a time of sleep Lamaila? Because in the time of Golus, the Yidden in this world are like they're sleeping. It's like they're sleeping in the sense that they're not full and they're not the way they should be in learning Torah and in performing mitzvahs. You can't compare the way we do this in the time of Golus to the way it is in the time when the Yidden are in Eretz Yisrael, in Yerushalayim, and they have the Sanhedrin and all the yeshivas, v'chulu v'chulu. So the time of Golus is a time when a person is sleeping from the performance of Torah and mitzvahs, and this causes, as a consequence, that also Lamaila, it's a time of sleep. That the Eibishter Kivyachal is in a condition of sleep. And Vasav Shat is in a condition of sleep. So he explains that what do you see happens when a person falls asleep at Gashmius? When a person falls asleep at Gashmius, so all of his keiches, all of his faculties are working. He has thoughts and he experiences emotions. He also sees things, he hears things, everything, but it's in his dream. And in a dream, it's very different than the way things are when a person is awake. When a person is awake, everything is in its right place. And things that don't make sense can't happen. Contradictions can't be validated. They can't be approved. They can't be allowed to happen. Things are held, everything in its right place. Mashenka, when a person is in his sleep, so everything is in a situation of contradiction. And what's supposed to be up is down. What's supposed to be down is up. So he says it's the same thing in the time of Golus. And in the time of Golus, even though the Yidden are the Eibishter's children, Banim Atem Lashem Elikechem, or Al Kolpanim on a lower level, they're servants to the Eibishter, Kabanimim Kavadim, and whichever category you place the Yidden, they're supposed to be Smuchim Al Shulchan Avim, they're supposed to be supported by their father, by the Eibishter, and therefore we're supposed to have everything good for us. And we're not supposed to be in the Tzaris, and we're not supposed to be experiencing the Tzaris of Golus. Nevertheless, in a time of Golus, things don't make sense. Because it's a time of sleep lamaila, just like when a person is dreaming, things don't make sense, things aren't working properly. So too, in a time of galus lamaila, things don't operate the way they should. And this is the greatness of Nod Dashnas HaMelech, that even though it was a time of Galus, Mitamol, the Eibishter Kivyachol Malkei Shaleilam woke up, and instead of the Yidden experiencing the tzaras of the Gzeira of Haman, everything was good for them. And this is a tremendousness, because it's a shinui, it's a change of the way things are supposed to work. And to change things lamaila is actually a bigger ness than to change things lamata. A Metzias Ruchnis is much stronger than a Metzias Gashmis. And we think it's the opposite. We think that Gashmis, it's a physical table, you can't move it. But a thought, you could move it. It doesn't really have a real existence. That's from our very impoverished view of the way we see things as human beings. The Emet says that a Metzias Gashmis isn't a real Metzias. There's nothing compelling it to be this way. It happens to be this way. You could change it to something else. And Ruchni is, the Indian itself demands that it should be that way. So when you have a change of the Seder, that the system doesn't operate the way it's supposed to, that it's a time of Golus Lamaila, and nevertheless at the same time is not the Doshnas HaMelech, that the Eibishter Kivyachol is not in a condition of sleep, and therefore he's giving the Yid and everything that they need. So that's a tremendousness. So what we need to understand, aside from last week's, the portion of the Maimon that we covered last week, and Samer Hashem from the portion of the Maimon that we're going to cover this week, is that the Fidikav is trying to give us a sense of the system, the way it works Lamaila. So he says, and he's using over here a mashal of a person. Okay, so in a person you have his keiches, you have his seichel, his ability, his intellectual capacity, his midas, his emotional capacity, and then his keich, the levushim of the nefesh, his machshava, his dibar, and his maisa. And you have the keich hariyah, and the keich hashmi, and the keich hazrika. You have all of the person's keiches. Now, everybody understands that these keiches, the beginning of their existence isn't from the seichel. In other words, seichel didn't start to exist at the level of seichel. Seichel starts to exist within the nefesh. Above all of these systems, above seichel, and above midas, and above the levushim and the other keiches, they all come from the nefesh. They begin to exist in the nefesh. The nefesh is what brings them about and reveals them in the person. Okay, so you have, when you think about a person and his seichel and his keiches, so you understand that there's two parts to the system. There's the source of it all, where it comes from, and it comes from his soul, right? I mean, it's something that naturally, intuitively, we all understand, that a person isn't like something that you put together. You went to a shelf, yeah, and you grabbed, you found seichel on the shelf, you put it together, and midas, you put it all together, and if it's you created this thing that really had, there's not one person. Every person intuitively feels that all of his parts are a part of him. There's one whole, and everything is just expressions and parts of that whole. So there's the nefesh, and the seichel, and the midas, and everything else comes from the nefesh. So in other words, when you get to this maimer, the point to take away is that seichel exists in two places, and midas exists in two places. It exists the way it comes down into the person and expresses itself as actual seichel and as actual midas and all of the other keches as well. And it exists the way it is before it came to a revealed state, in the beginning of the story, when it finds itself in its source, when it's in the nefesh. Okay, so there's two separate situations over here, and they're very, very different one from the other. And he says the same thing is lamaila. You have all of the iris that shine down here in this world, where the Eibishter gives hashpos down here to this world, where the Eibishter gives energy and life to this world. So you have the way it exists down here, but it didn't start down here. It comes from its shayrish, it comes from its source lamaila. And the way things are lamaila is very different than the way things are lamata. What's the key distinction? So he says like this. If we look at it from the perspective of the mata, if we look at it from the perspective, let's start with the mashal of the person, of the human being. If we look at it at the perspective of the person, when he's asleep, how is his mind working at that time? His seichel, very poorly. How are his emotions working at that time? Very poorly. They're not functioning the way they should. However, if you look at it from the perspective of the keich of the seichel itself, when is it in a higher state of being? It's in a higher state of being when it's in its source. When it's in the nefesh itself over there, it's in a much more subtle way, and it's much more edel. It's a much higher type of existence over there. So if we take it back to the idea of Golus, where's there a chesaron in Golus? The chesaron in Golus is only when you get to the mata. that lamata, the eris, are not where they're supposed to be, and therefore, in a revealed sense, down here in this world, you see a chesaron. But in truth, what's going on in Galus? All of the eris go back up to their source, and over there, they're in a much higher state, and they're a much higher level than when they're down here in this world.
That's the problem.
And that's the problem. as will be explained in detail as we move along in the Maimon. Okay, but the first thing is just to understand the system, right? To understand from a person that his seichel and his midas, they exist in two places. They exist either the way they're part of the nefesh, or they exist the way they're revealed within him as a human being already, as a conscious human being, if you will. And the same thing with the Eris Lamaila. You have the same thing with the Eris that the Eibusher puts in this world. You have the way they exist once they were brought down into this world, and you have the way they exist when they're still in their Eris Lamaila. And in a time of Golus, there's a chesaron, if you look at it from the perspective of the human being, or if you look at it the perspective from the world. But if you look at it at the perspective from the perspective of the soul itself, or of the shadish of the Eris themselves, then in a time of Golus, they're in a much higher state of being. They're all the way Lamaila. And he's going to explain this idea in greater detail in the following paragraphs and the next two Asias. So let's see how far we can get today. So we're holding in the second paragraph of Gimel. It starts with Ubir Inyan. The Rebbe is going to go now to explain some of the ideas that I tried to explain as an introduction. Ubir Inyan. Hine klal seder ha'ishtalshus ubedugmas hadagas de koiches hanefesh. The seder ishtalshus in general is similar. Its system and its composition is similar to the different levels that a person has within his own soul. The k'may shebekoiches hanefesh haschalus mitzias hakoiches hi k'may shem klulim benefesh sheshamim kulim ba'ashva. Just like by a person, his seichel and his midas and his machshava dibur ha'maisa and his koich hariyah v'chulu, they don't start in the physical, in the way they're manifested in the person's physical mind. They start first the way they are in the soul. And the way they are in the soul, they are in a much higher state of being. And therefore, over there, they're kulam b'hashva, they're all equal. You can't tell the difference between seichel and midas. We explained this last week, that when seichel and midas is in the source, is in the nefesh, so you don't see that seichel is cold and objective, and midas are passionate and subjective. You don't see that. All that you see is that the nefesh has seichel, the nefesh has midas. In other words, they're just a mere detail of the nefesh. Their whole existence is not their own personality, their own character. Their whole existence is just that they are a part of the nefesh, and that's a much higher type of existence. But then later they exit, they leave their source in the nefesh, and they're drawn down in a revealed way, to become embodied in the limbs of the person, of the body. And it's only after they come into the person's body that now you have differences between the keiches. And within the Keiches Hagloim themselves, you have different ways. In other words, you have one way, the way they come and express themselves in an ordered fashion. When the person is awake. And then you also have a second way, the way they exist, or the way they are in a concealed way. The matzav shel in a condition of sleep. And that's when the person experiences dreams where things aren't working properly. Until sometimes it gets even worse, the way you have it when a person is in a faint, where then his seichel and his midas don't express themselves, not even to the degree that they do when he's dreaming, when he's sleeping. The problem is that we don't have enough copies. We're out of copies.
But here,
it's a spilti muga. You could try to follow it. It's going to be somewhat similar. It's going to be somewhat similar. Share with me. You can start and
yeah, but it's probably similar.
Okay. Okay. So al derech ze gam lamali yesh them kol dargesel. So too, when you're talking lamali, you also have all of these levels. Kamamer Zalik, it says, in the same way that the soul fills the body and comes down into the body. It's the same system in the way that the Eibishter expresses himself and fills the world. Where do the spheres start from? The spheres don't start from Atzilus, where you already have actual spheres, but rather they have a source. And the source of these spheres is in the Ein Sof. Visham, and the way they exist over there, Him L'mayla Meitzchalk. So they're in a much higher state of being. They're higher than the separation of each one having its own character. Instead, they're just part of the Ein Sof. It's only after that they are drawn down into the world of Atzilus. So even though Atzilus is still considered a world of unity, where everything mixes, intermingles with the other thing, because they all feel the oneness of the Eibishter, and therefore they don't all set aside, a territory for themselves. But nevertheless, they still have, each thing has its own character. So maybe they all combine and they all work together, but each thing has its own character. Eser v'leitation, like it says in Sefer Yetzirah, Eser v'leiachadasa. And you say a specific number over here, there's 10. In other words, you're saying that everything has its own specific place. And only then can you distinguish between one sphere and another sphere, and you can understand and see which sphere is higher than Chachma, is higher than Binah, and that Chachma and Binah together are higher than all of the than Chesed, Gvur, Tiferes, etc., which are the Midas. And certainly, when they already enter into the lower worlds, into the world of Bria, where we already say now you have a new creation. So over here it's already ultimate Ischalkus, and certainly when it goes down to Yetzirah and Asiyah. Okay, and because of this separation of things, you have also a separation of things in this physical world, which is nishtalshel, which results from the spheres lamaila. Now, where do you see this in this world? The Beis Hamikdash, the Beis Hamikdash is the highest place in the world. And from the Beis Hamikdash, light disperses and emanates to the entire world. Because the world without a Beis Hamikdash is a place of concealment, where things are hidden and concealed. And light is drawn down into the world from the Beis Hamikdash, which is the soul of the world. Just like you have a Seder of Ishtalshlus in the spheres, that the lower sphere receives from the sphere that's above it. So too the world receives from the Beis Hamikdash, which is on a higher level than the rest of the world. And when that happens, so then you can also see the Maila of Yidden. That what? That Yidden are children to the Eibishter, and the Hamayla Da'avadahim, that they're servants of the Eibishter. Avadim Ne'amanim L'Hashem Adayim, they're faithful servants to their master. Okay, so what does the Fidik Rebbe want? What does the Rebbe want? The Rebbe is going along with the Fidik Rebbe's Maimer, but what L'chora, one of the points, or the point that I understand the way it works in the continuation of the Maimer, is to explain to you that it's because of the system of Ischalkos, so therefore you have a binary choice down here, Lamata. It could work in one of two ways. And that's the way it works in the world. Either you have a situation of when things are like in the awake state of being, and then the lights shine in a revealed way into this world, and then everything is good, because the Yidden are the Eibishter's children, and the Yidden are the Eibishter's servants, and therefore there's no situation of galus, because things are working the way they should. The light comes into the Beis Hamikdash. From the Beis Hamikdash, the light spreads to the rest of the world, and the world behaves according to the revelation of the light that it has in it. And that's a situation when it's not galus. But what happens when you have a situation of galus? Now everything becomes mixed up. Everything becomes mixed up, and that's what happens in galus, as we'll see by the end of this ice. And all of this is a parallel to what happens with the person's revealed keiches when he's awake. Mashenkim is man hagalus. On the other hand, what happens in the time of galus? So all of these eres that come down to the world are just like what happens to the person when he's sleeping. That just like when a person is asleep. So he has the keiches, he has seichel, and he has midas. They all come from his nefesh down into his body. That's why he feels them all when he dreams. That's why when he dreams, he sees things, he has thoughts, he has feelings. It all happens in this dream. But it happens in a completely mixed up way.
So Galus is
It's
a good
very
thing.
not good. Galus is a good
It's a
thing.
good thing because you're getting higher it is down here.
You're not bringing it down here. That's the problem.
Ah,
They express themselves. When you say that the fact that the Eretz are Lamaila, it's a
no,
good
he
thing.
says V'shegem was Vana Galus. You Yonim Shalomayla.
Mhm.
Hem Dugum Kelen Nefesh Adam Beis Hashinos. The Shenimshichu they come down and the Shtalsh Natzils and the Biyah. There is Bismana Galus. We are having Shacha
Yeah,
from Lamaila.
yeah, but in what
Higher
way?
than Ishtalshlus.
No, there's a key distinction. I just can't remember if I saw this in the Friedrich Rebbe's Maimer, then I won't mention it now,
Right.
or if I saw it in the Rebbe's Maimer, and then I'll let the Rebbe make the point in the Maimer. I think it was in the Friedrich Rebbe's Maimer, so I'm going to try to make the point. He says like this. The Rebbe actually makes the point. The Rebbe actually makes the point in
He's saying he's going to address it.
Eis Vav.
Okay, so let's.
In Eis Vav he explains it, but
yeah.
the Negeh for now, the Nekuda is that when you say, you have to take it apart. Like I said, it's a system. And that's the key thing that the Rebbe is trying to get us to understand. There's a system at work over here. Okay, so what are we saying? We're saying there's two components, and they could be in different states. One component is the shadish the way it is Lamaila. Okay? The keiches of everything, the way they are Lamaila. And then you're saying the way they come and they express themselves down here in this world. Okay? Now, what reveals itself in this world? Let's talk about a person. Okay? A person has his nefesh, his actual soul, the soul the way it is, higher and apart from the person. The soul is of course a much higher type of existence than a physical body and a human being in this physical world. And he said that the soul reveals itself in the person's body. What becomes revealed in the person's body? The soul the way it is, Lamaila, or dimensions, aspects of the soul that lower themselves to a lower type of existence and come down into the person? What comes in a revealed way? So I think you would agree that what comes in a revealed way is a limited version of the soul itself, where previously the soul's seichel was what? Was seichel eliki. It was godly seichel. Or at a very minimum, if you want to look at a lower level, it was spiritual. Its whole understanding was spiritual. It wasn't limited and it wasn't put into a framework of a physical world where logic itself is dictated by what makes sense in a physical world. So the seichel existed in a much higher state when it was over there. Is that revealed in the person's being? No, it's not revealed. The seichel that a person has is a very human seichel. In other words, when we say that the nefesh comes down into the body, we're not talking about the nefesh itself. The nefesh itself remains hidden from the body. It doesn't reveal itself in the body. It's just the keiches come down. What happens when the person is sleeping? We say now suddenly the nefesh itself revealed itself to the person? When a person in his dream, is there any reason to think that? No, that's not what happened. It's just that the keiches that did reveal themselves now suddenly left to a certain degree, left in the sense that they're no longer expressing themselves in a person the way they're supposed to express themselves, and they behave in a way the way they are before they come and they reveal themselves to the person. I'm not. It's an edler point that I wasn't
bounded by like physical reality.
They're not bounded by physical reality, but they didn't bring about any additional revelation of the soul either. They just lost the one good thing that they had, that they at least were useful to the person and allowed him to do things. They lost that too. The soul itself didn't reveal itself suddenly. They behave the way they would behave when they were in the soul because they kind of are no longer coming down to the person. So they behave that way still. But they didn't, because they behaved that way, they didn't bring with themselves a revelation of the soul. It makes sense somewhat.
So why is that better?
It's not. That's in response to his question. That if you're going to say that the Keiches HaNefesh now behave the way they do when they're in the soul itself, so you're saying seemingly that's a good thing.
But isn't that what we're saying? That when a person sleeps, that Keiches go higher and then become.
With a key distinction, from whose perspective? From the perspective of the person down here, he's worse off. He's in trouble now. He's dreaming. Right?
Why is it better for the soul?
From the soul's perspective, because now it's not lowered into these lowly human physical concepts of physicality and time and space and all the other nonsense that it's naturally not part of its existence. So from the perspective of the soul, it's much better. Okay? Now, of course, your question is very in line with the whole theme of the Maimer, if you will. This is where the Rebbe is going. The Rebbe is going to explain that there's actually a tremendous Maila in the time of Golus, and we're starting to become aware of it by noting that actually the Keiches went up to the Nefesh, or the Keiches went up to the way they are Lamaila. But we can't say yet that we're better off, because Lamata, it still experiences a complete cholent, is a complete Toyu Vavoyu, dark and light together, a complete Cheshech. V'haraya, look at what's going on around you. Yeah, look at what's going around in the world. Look what's going on in the world. So that's not exactly a good situation.
So we see that the Shir Amal says that, but in Golus were
Correct.
As after Hashem brings us back, then Ozimo is Chotpinu,
Correct.
which is reality.
Correct. Yes. It's explained in Chassidus.
So so in Golus when the state of Kecholmim, and what's the benefit? What's the
He didn't say
side benefit?
We didn't get to that yet. We didn't get to that yet. We're just explaining that conceptually there is some benefit, but it doesn't apply to us at all. Now, now Deb is going to start making the point that I mentioned before already, that he mentioned in short in the first half of Gimel. He's going to make the point more clearly that there's actually a Milo over here. However, nevertheless, just like with a person down here, what's actually happening when a person sleeps? It's not pshat that a person loses things. No. What's happening is that his keiches go back to their source in the soul, which is actually a very good thing. That's why the person goes to sleep tired and he wakes up fully refreshed, because they went back to their soul. So in other words, we change the definition of what's happening from a statement of bad, that the person is now dreaming and therefore he loses his senses, to making a part of a statement. We're just saying what happened. Neither bad nor good. What we're saying is that the keiches went up to their source in the nefesh, and now start taking it apart. From the person's perspective, lamata, it ends up in a bad result. From the perspective of lamaila, it ends up in a good result. So this is what actually happens. That the keiches operate in a mixed up way. If you look at it, the way the keiches are included in the nefesh, the way they are in their natural place. Even though over there also, you can't take apart one from the other, but over there in the soul, and the fact that you can't take apart from the seichel from the midas, that's not a negative. Adraba, when they're in this state of being included in their source, in the nefesh over there, they're in a much higher level of shleimus than they are than the way they come down, than the way they are when they come down in a revealed way. Al derech zehu gam b'hanimshal sasotu in the nimshal. The inyan ha'is almost bizman hagolus shino hu shagiluyim is alim lemikayidam. What happens in the time of Golus? Not that things were destroyed, but rather that things now returned to their source, to their root. V'sham, and how are things over there? Hamoker di Yisrael im hamayla di Yisrael. The source of the Yidin, which comes along with the recognition of the greatness of the Yidin, who mit den ganzen Sturm is in full force. The dugmas keiches aklun benefesh and b'shleimus. Just like the person's keiches, when they're in their source, they have over there a shleimus, which they don't have when they're in a revealed way. But the only problem is that this is only the way it is lamaila in the upper world. Ubeseder Ishtalshlus ain't Zanik. And Seder Ishtalshlus, there's no hint whatsoever, which is what I was trying to explain in that whole long drasha. The problem is that there's no hint of that. We didn't reveal that down here. And therefore, we end up, the result is a situation of Golos. However, when it was not the Shnas HaMelech, v'nimshach me'hamakar b'pnimis b'seder ishtalshlus, oz miskala malis Yisrael mitashturim. Suddenly now you have a revelation of the Maila of the Yidden and noch mitashturim. In other words, what he says over here, he said over here a kinu idea. What's not the Shnas HaMelech? Until now, how did we understand not the Shnas HaMelech? That you have a situation of regular times, of Shalom Ketiknon, when things are the way they're supposed to be. Then you can see the Maila of Yidden. Why can you see the Maila of Yidden? Because the Eiris are revealed down here in this world. But how are they revealed down here in this world? By lowering themselves, by going through a Seder of Ishtalshlus, like you said, all the way down to the Beis HaMikdash, and then all the way down to the rest of the world. And then we say in a time of Golus, we say what happens? They go back up. So what's not the Shnas HaMelech? That even though the Yidden are not performing mitzvahs and learning Torah the way they should be, nevertheless, we're back to the original system. That's where we understood it until now. That not the Shnas HaMelech, that even though it's a time of Golus, we have a situation where there's no sleep, Lamaila. And down here also there's no sleep. So we're okay. No, based on the whole long explanation, he says you missed the vart completely. There's a whole new vart over here. What's the vart? That not the Shnas HaMelech means that the time is a time of Golus. In other words, where are the Eiris? They're all the way up in the Elam Yisraelim. In other words, they're in a much stronger force up there. And as they are in the stronger state, if you will, they reveal themselves down here. And that's not the Shnas HaMelech. That the Eiris, the way they are L'mayla, where they exist in a much higher way, reveal themselves in that way down here in this world. So then the ness of not the Shnas HaMelech is much greater than just opposites. That's a time of Golus, but nevertheless, we have the behavior of regular years, of non-Golus years. It's much more than that, because in order to accomplish this, then in a time of Golus, we should have the revelation of the Keiches down here. We have no choice but to take things the way they exist in a time of Golus, which is the way they are in their source. That's the state of being, and take it as it is and bring it down into this world and reveal it into this world. And it's going to get back to this point later in the Maimer.
Is the muscle for that when a person wakes up, he's more energized?
No.
Or it's different?
It's different. It's different. I don't want to do a spoiler, but if you don't make it here next week, look at Icebop. That's where he's gonna explain it. Okay, so now we have a new definition of Noded Shnas HaMelech. The Noded Shnas HaMelech means that the lights, the way they are in a higher way, in a higher type of existence, reveal themselves down here in Seder Ishtalshlus. So according to this, we emphasized even more the contradictions that come together in the time of Golus. Notwithstanding the fact that the Maila of Yidden in the time of Golus is even greater than in the time of the Beis HaMikdash. Why? In the time of the Beis HaMikdash, we see the Maila of Yidden after the whole world was already lowered down into a physical world. Mashenkin in the Zman HaGolus, we see the Maila of the Yidden the way they are in their source in the much higher Elam Yisraelim, which that's where the source of the Yidden is. So in one sense, they're on a much higher level. Nevertheless, at the same time, and because of this, not only that you can't recognize the Maila of the Yidden, you can't feel it being expressed anywhere in this world, but it even goes lower that the Yidden have to get everything through the ministers of the Goyim, which is referring to not necessarily Begashmis, it's talking about the Ruchnistic ministers, and it expresses itself in Gashmis also, that we have to get our spouse through the Goyim. So things are worse off. And this is one of the reasons why Golos is compared to pregnancy. Why? This is the Alter Rebbe says this idea in Torah, or look at the Torah. Torah is going to say that. Because what do you see when a fetus is in the mother's womb? What do you see? You see two opposites coming together. The Afalpi, on the one hand, you have Shanir Dolak al Reisha, he has a candle shining lit on top of his head. In other words, he experiences tremendous and a malach teaches him the entire Torah. So he's on the highest state possible. And none of that continues once he's born. He's born in a second, he loses it all. So that's only in during pregnancy. Nevertheless, you see the opposite. The position of the fetus is when it's in the womb, that the head is in between the knees. In other words, when you look at the physical form of the person or the physical position of the person, so a person after he's born, he stands upright. And in his physical gestalt, if you will, you see his head expresses what's going on in the pneumius. The head is physically higher than the person. Masha'enken is higher than the heart, higher than the midas, and the hands, etc. Masha'enken, when the baby, when the fetus is in the mother's womb, so the way he's positioned, it doesn't even express the mila of the reish. The mila of the reish is not above the other limbs of the body. And even more than that, it's actually on the same exact level of the feet. And we further see the way the keches of the person don't function properly. Also, his food doesn't come through the mouth, which is the appropriate way. It comes in through the belly button. Through the navel or whatever it's called.
Umbilical cord.
Through the umbilical cord, but it enters the body through the navel, I think it's called. Either way, as it's explained, all of this, the Alter Rebbe explains this in detail, and the Rebbeim afterwards in their Mamorim as well. Okay? So, this is Negeir for the next Eis, that the Rebbe brings in this idea that Golus is compared to the time of pregnancy. That just like we explained in the time of Golus, you have these contradictions coming together. On the one hand, in the time of Golus, the Yidden, the Mila of the Yidden is with the greatest force, but that's only Lamaila. But on the other hand, and together with that, even though that's the situation right now is a time of Golus. So right now, in the Elam Yisraelim, in the upper worlds, the Mila of the Yidden is seen in a much greater way than it's seen in the time of the Beis HaMikdash. But on the other hand, what happens in this world? In this world, it's the complete opposite. That the Yidden are in a lower state than they were in the time of the Beis HaMikdash. So that's the same idea that we see with a fetus in the womb. That on the one hand, it's learning Torah, it's being taught the entire Torah, but on the other hand, all of its limbs aren't working properly the way they should. So you have these contradictions coming together, and there's a similarity in the ideas. There's a similarity in the idea of the time of Golus being a time when there's these contradictions coming together. And in pregnancy also, the way the fetus is also contradictions coming together. And that's going to be important for the next Eis. Okay, take 12 minutes for this Eis, yeah? Valpiza, this will be 50 minutes of the shir. Valpiza, yesh levayin mashamar Chazal. There's a beautiful idea over here. According to this, we could explain what Chazal say. B'shosh nichnasu nachlim laheichol, when the goyim, I think it was the Yevanim, either the Yevanim or the Romans, when they entered the heichol, ro kruvim hamurim zeh b'zeh, they saw paintings, drawings on the walls of the heichol, which depicted kruvim. Malachim, I'm not sure if it means like shapes of malachim or shapes of the kruvim that were on the arin, but either way, they were embracing one another.
It says that it was the actual kruvim embracing one another.
In the Gemara, actually, in the Gemara, it looks like it was drawings. It was the actual kruvim.
Yeah, the actual. That's
was the actual.
It's what brought all the sichos.
It says when Eretz Yisrael was doing Torah mitzvahs and everything, the kruvim were embracing.
I thought they were facing, not embracing. Either way, whatever it is, but they saw an image of the kruvim embracing one another. Seemingly, this doesn't add up. Was the time of the greatest galus. This was the downfall. The embrace of the kruvim shows us, it expresses the great love that the Eibishter has to the Yidden, which is just like the love of a man to his wife, or between a man and a wife. What is this? This is not the Eibishter showing us his love. It's the Eibishter showing us his a stern face, or whatever you want to call it, but certainly not love. Where's the love? So why did they see this when they entered into the Heichel? According to what we explained earlier in the Bible, we can now understand this. Specifically then, when Golus began, there was a revelation of a much higher light. Now we have a light that's higher than Hishtalshalus, because all of the lights that were previously lowered into Hishtalshalus now went back into their source. And over there, the love to the Yidden is much, much higher. The problem is that this light remained in its place, above the whole Seder Hishtalshalus, out of this world. Didn't shine down into the Hishtalshalus, and certainly not down into the physical world. So we can understand why these contradictions existed at that time, because that's really what's going on. On the one hand, the Eibishter is showing us a greater love than ever if you exist, if you see things, if you are in the upper worlds. But if you're in the lower worlds, it's a time of Golus, and one leads to the other. It's only because of Golus that the lights were able to leave the constraints of this physical world, that now they could be in a much higher state of love, the way it is Lamaila in the upper worlds. So that's not yet adding anything, but now there was going to have a tremendous point. Rebbe adds, it says in Gemara that before a man travels overseas, he should be together with his wife, and I'm pretty sure it's brought on la halacha also. Okay, so the Mekivan shebizman hagolus Knesset Yisrael he keisha shalach ba'ala l'medina sayam. Since during the time of Golus, the Gemara compares it to a woman whose husband has journeyed overseas. Therefore, before the Eibishter travels overseas, whatever it says in Torah, the Eibishter does. So therefore, he was intimate with the Yidden, and therefore the kruvim that the goyim saw over there were like a man and a woman in embrace, because the Eibishter was now going to Medina Hayam. He was entering into a state of Golus where he's distant and overseas from the Yidden who are compared to his wife. So what happens before that? What happens just before you leave? There's the scene of the Pekid. There's the scene of the being together. And that's why the Goyim saw that when they entered into the Heichel. And according to this, we can understand with greater depth why Golus is like Ibur is like pregnancy. Why Geula is compared to birth. What happens when a person is with his wife down here in this world? Nasi Yetziras Avlad. That's when the child is formed. That's when he's created. That's when he begins. The only thing is that you don't see it right away. In the beginning, he's just in a hidden state when he's a fetus in his mother's womb. The Helam Lagami, you can't see him at all. But then after a little while, as the fetus develops, and now there's a little bit more revelation, but it's still Behelam. And during the entire time of Golus, the child keeps developing and keeps growing until the moment of birth, which then he exits into this world Begila, and now you finally have the revelation. So listen to this whole opposite system from the way you would think it is. This is really what's going on. From the moment before Golus started, it was at that moment that the great Eir was created. And not only in the Olam Esilyonim, and this is the key addition that the Rebbe makes, Gam Lemato, also down here. But it exists down here in a hidden state. But if in the Golus, in a state of Golus of Ibur. And during the time of Golus, this light actually grows and develops from day to day until speedily in our times we will have the revelation in the Gula Hasidah. Do you realize over here they ever turned the whole system upside down? What happens? But when does it happen? That's the question. That's what ever turns it all upside down.
The time of Shana.
Not even. That's when the whole game is happening.
The development.
Let's think about what happened. The Yidden were about to be sent off into Golus. It was at that moment that this new light of Mashiach, which is compared to the child that's going to be born when Mashiach comes, that's when it was created. And not in the upper worlds, the way we were talking earlier in the Maimer, that the revelation is only in the upper worlds. It was Dafka at that moment that it was created down here, only it's hidden from us. We can't see it. And where does it develop? Where does this revelation of Mashiach develop the entire time? Down here in this world it develops. During the time of Galus, it develops down here in this world, not in the Elam Yisraelim. It's a whole other way of thinking about what the truth and what the reality of this world is. In the standard way of thinking about it, what do you think? Down here we have nothing. And the whole time we're working to bring something from far away that's foreign to this world down here. And when is it going to happen? Not now. It's going to happen later. That says you have the whole story backwards. When does it happen? Specifically in the time of Galus. Where does it happen? Down here in this world. It's not a foreign thing to us. So if so, what's the truth of Galus? If you try to bring it down to yourself emotionally or intellectually, what's the truth of Galus? The Rebbe is redefining what the whole truth of Galus is. Is the truth of Galus a punishment and a time of having less opportunity and less connection and less creation of Kedusha? Or is the time of Galus the ultimate time of opportunity, the ultimate time of creation, the ultimate time of connection to the Eibishter? So he says, look at the way it is when when a husband leaves his wife. A husband leaves his wife. What's going on? Begashmi. Begashmi is it's the olden days, and she's in Eretz Yisrael, and he went to England. And to come back is going to take years if he ever does. And she doesn't know, she's sitting alone. But what happens? It says in Torah the moment before, but what does she see? She sees nothing. It's behelam legamre. Even after time passes, that things start developing, it's still hidden within her womb. You can't see nothing. So it's a time of ultimate concealment, but really it's not. She has the child. And it's only because the husband left that she now has the child. And where's the child being developed? Right there with her. Where's the revelation of Mashiach happening? Right here in this world. And why is it and when is it happening? Dafka when the husband left, Dafka in the time of Galus. It's a whole opposite way of looking at it.
So Galus is a time of development.
Galus is a time of development. It's a shame that it feels so hard for us, but it's important for us to, if you have this attitude, if you have this approach, it picks you up. It picks you up. You're walking around with a much more positive state of mind. You're walking around feeling like you're living in a place of goodness. And you constantly have to remind yourself, because when somebody passes away or when somebody's struggling with panos or whatever it is, it keeps hitting you. What you feel with your physical senses keeps hitting you backwards. But if you have this awareness that, first of all, this is the truth of what's going on, and if you try to at least assimilate it a little bit into your consciousness, then you could live a whole other type of life. It's a whole other experience. It's a whole other understanding of where you are and what you're doing. Okay, Ritz Hashem will continue next week.
But it's still a hidden here.